In 1912, a British survey team crossed the Gobi Desert on a simple mapping mission. Their days were ordinary until the ground beneath them began to change. A dead animal half buried, a nighttime tremor, a camel collapsing without cause. By then they realized something under the sand was tracking their steps. So before we continue, please make sure you leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. I remember the taste of dust more than anything. It sat at the back of my throat from the day we left Urga, and it never left me until long after I was back in England. In the spring of 1912, the Gobi was not a place a man from Surrey expected to see, yet there I was, standing beside a row of kneeling camels, watching our crates and canvas bundles pass from hand to hand under a white, empty sky. We were 7 in all, if you counted the Mongol drivers as a single shifting presence, which is how Dr. Ashcroft always spoke of them. I was attached to the expedition as a junior assistant and recorder. My assignment from the Royal Geographical Society, simple on paper: document routes, note geological formations, and assist with the cataloging of any unusual specimens. In practice, it meant doing whatever Ashcroft did not wish to do himself. He was our leader, a tall, spare man with a narrow beard and a habit of tapping his spectacles against his teeth when he was thinking. His interest lay in the strata beneath the dunes, and in the fossils he believed the desert still concealed. We had Captain Harrington as well, retired cavalry, skin already browned by campaigns in India and Africa. He had come officially as head of security, unofficially because someone in London felt more comfortable if a man who understood rifles and discipline marched with the scholars. Mr. Collins, our photographer, traveled with a heavy box camera and more glass plates than sense, as Harrington liked to remind him. There was also Miss Evelyn Price, which shocked the men at the telegraph office when they first read her name on the manifest. She was an ethnographer and linguist, serious and sharp-eyed, with her hair pinned back beneath a wide hat and a notebook always in hand. The others were local men. At their head walked Batsa Khan, our guide, who moved across the sand with a steady, tireless gait and spoke enough Russian and broken English to bridge the gaps. He was not old, but his face carried deep lines at the corners of his mouth and eyes, carved there by wind and years. Around him clustered 4 camel drivers whose names I never learned properly. They laughed among themselves, slept close to the animals, and watched us with a mixture of curiosity and caution. We left the last trace of settlement behind us on the 3rd day. The low wooden huts of the last way station vanished into a gray line on the horizon, and after that there were only yellow grasses, scattered stones, and the pale dome of the sky. The wind came and went without pattern. Sometimes it arrived in a long, steady breath that cooled the sweat on our backs. At other times it rose in short, sharp gusts that threw grit into our eyes and teeth. Travel in those conditions was slow. The camels set the pace, and the desert ignored our impatience. By noon each day, the heat pressed down on us. In the evenings, the temperature fell with a speed that never failed to surprise me. My fingers stiffened as I tried to write. We slept in a wide ring around the camels, each of us wrapped in wool and canvas, listening to the low groans of the animals and the faint hiss of shifting sand. At the last way station before the dunes deepened, we heard the first mention of the creature. A family of herders ran the place, their felt tents set up beside a low wooden shed. We traded tea and canned meat for fresh water and a few joints of mutton. While the men haggled, Miss Price sat with an old herder near the entrance of his tent, their heads close together. The old man spoke in a slow, rough voice, his eyes fixed on the south, where the sand rose in pale waves. When she joined us by the fire that night, she looked unsettled in a way I had not seen before. "He spoke of something in the dunes," she said, stirring her tea without drinking it. "They call it Olgoi-Khorkhoi. He would not say the name at first. He touched the ground, and then his chest, as if that did something to protect him. "A spirit," Colin said. He lay on his side, one arm propping up his head, the other reaching toward the tin of biscuits. "Not a spirit, a creature, a kind of worm. He says it moves under the sand, long, thick, red, no eyes, no legs. He says it kills livestock and men, that you must not disturb the deep dunes." Collins laughed and bit into a biscuit. "Excellent, a proper desert monster. We shall photograph it and make our fortune." Captain Harrington snorted. "Local superstition. You can find the same in any wasteland. They always imagine something worse than the heat and starvation." I glanced at Batsa Khan. He sat a little apart, near the picket line, his hands busy checking a camel's harness. At the mention of the worm, his shoulders had tensed. Now, hearing the captain's dismissal, he kept his head down, but his jaw worked. "You have heard of this as well?" I asked him quietly. He did not look up. "Old men talk, stories for children. We go south anyway. That is where you want to go." "That is where the formations are," Ashcroft said. His voice held a note of impatience. "Desert breeds tales. Snakes become dragons. Insects become man-eaters. We are here to work, not to feed on ghosts." His words settled the matter in the way his words tended to. Still, when I lay down to sleep that night, I could not help feeling the sand beneath my blanket in a new way. I imagined all that might live in it, hidden beyond sight. Beetles, scorpions, buried roots, and now, in my mind, something larger and nameless. By the 5th day, the land changed. The last scrub vanished. The ground rolled in bare, pale ridges. The sun reflected off the sand so fiercely that, even with my hat pulled low, my eyes stung and watered. We marched in single file, camels swaying, the drivers calling to them with low sounds that blended with the wind. Our boots sank slightly with each step, and the effort of lifting them again made my thighs ache. It was mid-morning when we found the first carcass. One of the drivers called out. We halted, and Harrington pushed forward, rifle over his shoulder, thumb resting near the safety in an old habit. Half buried in the sand lay the body of a goat. Only the upper half showed, the rest swallowed by the dune. Its hide had turned a strange dark color along the flanks, something between purple and brown. The mouth hung open, teeth bared. Dried foam clung to the lips. "Left from a caravan," Harrington said. "Died of thirst, most likely." Ashcroft knelt, brushing sand away from the exposed side. He adjusted his spectacles, his nose wrinkling at the smell. "There is some discoloration here," he said, "possibly rot setting in. The climate can play tricks on a body." Miss Price said nothing. She stood with her arms folded, eyes on the goat's stiff legs. I noticed the drivers muttering among themselves, their voices quick and uneasy. One of them made a sign with his fingers across his chest. When we moved on, they gave the carcass a wide berth. That night, the wind died completely. Our little camp sat in a hollow between low dunes. The sky above was so clear that the stars seemed to hang within reach. This should have comforted me, but instead the silence pressed on my ears. No insects, no distant dog, nothing but the faint creak of leather and the soft grind of sand as the camels shifted their weight. I woke sometime after midnight with a strange feeling in my chest, as if something in the world around me had changed. At first I thought it was a dream, some echo of the old herder's words, but when I held my breath, I felt it again. A faint, steady vibration under my back traveling up through the blanket, through my ribs. I propped myself up on my elbows and looked around. The dying embers of the fire sent up a thin thread of smoke. Collins snored loudly under his blanket. Harrington lay on his back, one hand on his chest, the other near the rifle by his side. On the far side of the ring, one of the camels jerked its head up, ears twitching. The vibration deepened for a moment, then stopped. Sand settled in tiny slides around the edge of the nearest dune. I waited, every muscle tight, but nothing else moved. After a long stretch of stillness, I lay down again, telling myself it was only the movement of the animals or some small shift in the ground as the temperature changed. In the morning, as we broke camp, one of the water barrels had tilted and rolled half a foot from where we had left it. The sand under it had sunk slightly, leaving a shallow depression. Harrington cursed about carelessness. The driver swore it had been firm the night before. We righted it and tightened the ropes. No one mentioned the strange feeling in the night because no one but me admitted to having felt it. As we pressed further south, the dunes grew higher and the hollows between them deeper. Our path wound around them where it could, climbed them where it had to. Sweat soaked my shirt each day and dried in stiff patches by evening. I learned to measure distance not by miles but by the number of times we halted to rest the camels. On the 7th day, the air changed. There was no visible sign of storm, no dark line on the horizon, but the wind took on a dry, crackling edge. Grains of sand stung the skin even when the gusts were weak. The drivers spoke in quick bursts, their eyes moving over the ridges ahead. At one halt, I saw Batsa Khan press his ear to the ground for a long moment, face tense. "What are you listening for?" I asked. "Movement," he said. "Deep, not wind. More caravans." I tried to keep my voice light. "Not caravans." He hesitated, then stood. "We should walk softly. No shouting, no beating on the pots. Old stories say it feels what moves above it." "It?" I asked, though I knew what he meant. He did not answer. Instead, he went to speak with Ashcroft in low tones. I watched the two men. Ashcroft listened, then shook his head with an impatient gesture. When the guide returned to the line, his mouth was set, his gaze on the sand. That afternoon, the first of our camels died. It happened without warning. One moment, the animal walked with its slow, rolling gait, rope swaying from the nose ring. The next, its front legs buckled. It lurched forward, gave a hoarse groan, and went down on its side. Sand puffed up around the body. The driver at its lead stumbled and fell to his knees, shouting. We gathered around while the other camels shifted and snorted, their eyes rolling. Harrington pushed between us, already reaching for the knife at his belt in case he needed to cut the packs free. The fallen camel's chest heaved twice, then stopped. Its eyes stared at nothing. A thin strand of saliva hung from its mouth and then broke, staining the sand. "There was nothing wrong with it this morning," Collins said. His voice rose. "I watched them load it. It ate. It drank. It was fine." "That can change quickly," Ashcroft said. He knelt, placed 2 fingers against the animal's neck, then pulled his hand back. No pulse. Batsa Khan crouched opposite him, his face tight. He did not touch the camel. Instead, he examined the sand near its belly. He brushed it aside with the edge of his hand, careful not to let his skin come in contact with the hide. The grains immediately under the body had a darker tint than the rest. "Smell," he said. I bent closer. A sharp, sour odor rose from the patch beneath the carcass, different from the usual stench of an animal's last breath. It caught in the nose and made the eyes water. "Poison," one of the drivers murmured behind me. "Nonsense," Ashcroft said. "It is only the fluids draining in the heat. Help me move the packs. We are losing light." The drivers no longer joked among themselves. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the soft pad of feet, and the occasional clink of metal. Even Collins, who usually chatted to me about lenses and exposure, kept his thoughts to himself. I found my hand resting more often on the notebook in my pocket, though I did not take it out. Recording everything now felt less important than simply reaching the next camp. That night we chose a hollow shielded on three sides by low ridges. The sky had a dull haze, and the stars appeared muted. Harrington insisted on a proper watch, in 2-hour shifts. It was the first time he had pressed the matter since we left the last settlement. If animals are dying of causes we do not understand, we should keep our wits about us, he said. I do not care whether it is some venom, a waterborne disease, or your legendary worm. I will not wake to find another beast on its side and our provisions spoiled. No one protested. I drew the second watch from midnight to 2. When Harrington shook my shoulder, my dreams vanished so quickly that I could not recall them, only the taste of fear they left behind. I sat up, pulled on my coat, and took his place at the edge of the camp. The fire had burned down to a glow. I fed it a little more wood until it gave off enough light to keep the darkness at a distance. Beyond the ring of camels and sleeping forms, the dunes rose in pale mounds. There was no wind. The air felt heavy, as if the day's heat still hung there, unwilling to disperse. For a while, nothing moved. I listened to my own breathing, counting it to keep my mind steady. The quiet was not complete. The desert gave off its own small sounds, the faint slide of sand, the soft crunch when a camel shifted a hoof, a distant creak from a saddle. I told myself that I knew each of those noises. I told myself there was nothing new among them. Then I felt it again. The faint tremor, distant at first, passed through the ground and into my legs where they touched the sand. It came as a low, regular pulse, not in time with the movements of the animals. I set my palm on the ground at my side. The vibration moved under my hand, traveled from one side of the hollow to the other, then faded. I wanted to wake the others at once. My hand moved toward Harrington's boot, then stopped. If I roused them over a slight disturbance in the sand, Ashcroft would dismiss me. The drivers would be alarmed. I sat instead, every muscle held still, and stared at the nearest ridge. When the movement came again, it was closer. The sand at the foot of the western slope quivered. Tiny avalanches ran down the sides, leaving narrow trails. A low, dull sound reached my ears, more felt than heard, as if something dense shifted under the surface. "Who goes there?" I whispered. Foolish words with no target. My throat felt dry. I lifted the rifle Harrington had left for me and held it ready, though I had no idea where to aim. My finger lay against the metal guard. I forced myself not to place it on the trigger. The trembling intensified, then stopped with a suddenness that made me flinch. A small depression remained where the sand had sunk slightly. No shape broke the surface. No animal fled. The ridge stood as before, indifferent. I sat rigid until the end of my watch, every nerve expecting a resurgence. When I finally woke Miss Price and handed her the rifle, my hands shook. She noticed. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Nothing I can name," I said. "Watch that ridge. If you feel the ground move, wake the others. Do not wait." Her eyes sharpened. She nodded without making light of it. As I lay back under my blanket, exhaustion pulled at me, but sleep did not come at once. I stared at the sky until the stars blurred, thinking of the old herder touching the earth in his chest and of Batsakan pressing his ear to the sand. In the morning, I told Ashcroft what I had felt. He listened with a face that gave away nothing, then turned to study the ridge in question. The depression was still visible, a shallow hollow midway up the slope. "It could be a minor collapse," he said. "Natural settling. You are unused to these lands. Your senses are on edge. You feel ordinary movements as extraordinary." "You did not sit with your hand on the ground," I said. The words came out sharper than I intended. His eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me blind, Mr. Ward?" "I am saying that it was real," I answered. It was the first time I had spoken to him in that tone. If something moves under us, we should not ignore it. Harrington stepped between us before the exchange could worsen. "Whatever you felt, it warrants caution," he said. "We reduce the load on each animal, distribute the weight, and keep to firmer ground where we can. No camping in deep basins unless we have no choice. That should satisfy both of you." Ashcroft muttered, but he did not counter the captain. Miss Price gave me a brief nod, a small gesture of support that eased some of the tension in my chest. The drivers listened from a short distance away, their faces tight. When we set out, they walked even more softly than before, and their eyes rarely left the sand ahead. The day's march took us through an area where the dunes rose higher than houses back home. Their sides were smooth and pale, with only faint ripples from the wind. The heat there was stronger, the air barely moved. Our footprints vanished almost as soon as we made them, the grain sliding back to fill the shallow depressions. Near midday, we came across another carcass. This time, it was a camel, or what remained of one. Only the upper torso and neck showed above the surface. The head lolled at an unnatural angle, jaw dislocated. The skin around the exposed parts had the same strange dark color I had seen on the goat, but here it extended in irregular patches bordered by a faint crust. "What happened to it?" I asked. "Buried in a storm," Harrington said, but there was less conviction in his tone. "Suffocated." She pointed with a gloved hand. "Look at the edges of the discoloration." I leaned closer. The border between normal hide and darkened areas had a thin, dried line, as if some liquid had once stood there before seeping in. The sand at the base of the neck had hardened into small clumps. "Acid," Collins whispered. "I saw something like that once when a bottle broke in a laboratory. The floor did this." Ashcroft frowned. "We have no evidence of any such substance here. Do not invent causes because they please your imagination." Collins flushed. "I am not inventing anything. I am describing what I see." The argument might have continued, but at that moment one of the drivers cried out. He had stepped closer to the carcass and thrust his staff into the sand to test the depth. The staff went down farther than expected. The sand around the camel's body sagged. A faint tremor ran outward from the point passing under our feet. "Back!" Harrington shouted. "All of you back from that edge." We obeyed. As we retreated, the sand around the buried portion of the carcass sank in a slow, deliberate motion. It did not collapse in a sudden slide. It lowered in one smooth descent, as if pulled from beneath. The camel's head dropped further, then disappeared. In a few breaths, the entire body was gone. The surface smoothed over, leaving no trace except for a faint darker patch and a shallow depression. I felt my heart hammering. No one spoke for several seconds. Even the camels stood still, their long necks stretched, ears rigid. "That," Miss Price said finally, her voice low, "was not the wind." Batsakan spat into the sand and made the same sign the old herder had used. The drivers echoed it. "We should turn back," he said. His English was halting, but his meaning was clear. "There are other routes, other lands. This place is wrong." Ashcroft's jaw worked. He looked from the smooth patch of sand to the south, where the dunes continued in their endless lines. "We have not come all this way to retreat because the ground unsettles us," he said. "There is likely an underground cavity there, a pocket of weaker sand. The weight of the carcass and the staff disturbed it. That is all." Harrington did not answer at once. His gaze stayed on the depression. When he spoke, his voice had changed. "I cannot order you to turn back," he said to the guide. "But I will not drag my men forward if you refuse to lead us. Decide now." The air felt colder, though the sun still burned overhead. I watched Batsakan, trying to read his thoughts in the tightness of his features and the way his hands rested on his belt. The drivers waited, eyes on him. Our future route lay in his next words. "We go on," he said at last, "but we move faster. No more delays. No stopping for rocks or bones. We cross this stretch and leave it behind." He did not sound convinced. None of us were. Yet we adjusted the straps, checked our canteens, and stepped forward again, deeper into the dunes. By late afternoon, the heat had a brittle edge, the kind that made the air shimmer above the sand. We marched in a long, silent line. No one stopped to examine any formations. Ashcroft kept glancing toward the ground as if reconsidering every assumption he had carried into the desert. Harrington scanned the ridges with restless focus, his hand never far from his rifle. The drivers muttered prayers when they thought we could not hear. I felt the strain in the group with every step. The quiet between us was no longer simple fatigue. It carried tension, suspicion, and the sense that each of us listened more to the sand beneath our boots than to each other's voices. I caught myself raising my foot carefully, lowering it without force, as though heavy steps might wake something deeper. When the sun began to drop, we found a narrow stretch of firmer ground where scattered stones broke through the sand. Harrington chose it for camp. No one argued. The camels were restless and pulled at their leads. The drivers tied them in a wide circle, speaking softly in their own tongue, each word meant to soothe or warn or both. We set the fire early and ate with little conversation. Collins managed a few comments about the light and how he wished to photograph certain ridges in the morning, but even he sounded as though his voice belonged to a different man. Miss Price sat close to the fire with her notebook open, yet she wrote nothing. The pages fluttered in the faint wind, untouched by her pencil. I wondered what she was thinking, but her expression stayed unreadable. After the meal, Harrington gathered us. His posture was taut. He looked older in the firelight. "We need a plan," he said. "If something is moving under us or tracking us, we cannot keep pretending the desert is the only danger here. If anyone sees or hears anything unusual, wake another person immediately. No one should remain alone." Ashcroft bristled slightly. "We must not let superstition guide us. We have observed unusual ground behavior, yes, but nothing that confirms any living organism of extraordinary size." "And what sank that camel?" Harrington asked. "A collapse," Ashcroft insisted, though he avoided looking at the drivers. "An unstable cavity." "Then why didn't it collapse earlier before we stepped near it?" Harrington said. Something reacted. Miss Price closed her notebook. We all saw it. We need to acknowledge that something is aware of movement. Pretending otherwise gives us no advantage. Ashcroft exhaled sharply through his nose, but he did not challenge her. The fire crackled. The shadows behind us felt too deep. We agreed on watches again, but this time pairs took each shift. I was assigned to the second watch with Collins. Neither of us protested. When the first pair lay down, the fire dimmed to a faint glow, and the desert returned to its oppressive quiet. I fell into a light, uneasy sleep. When Collins shook me awake, my mind surfaced with a feeling that something had already gone wrong. I sat up quickly, scanning the ridges, but everything appeared still. We took our place at the edge of camp. Collins held the rifle while I fed a few dry twigs into the fire. The light rose, casting a warm circle that didn't reach far enough. The air felt close and heavy. The camels shifted uneasily, giving low groans. "Do you think there's really something under us?" Collins whispered. "I don't know," I said, "but the ground shouldn't move on its own." He swallowed. "I keep thinking about that color on the hide." That wasn't rot. The memory sat in my mind with a weight I didn't want to name. Let's just get through our watch. We fell silent. Time stretched. I kept my gaze on the faint dune lines around us. The fire cracked softly. My heartbeat settled into a steady rhythm. Then a new sound rose behind the camels. A soft shiver of sand, distinct and deliberate. Not wind, not an animal shifting its weight. It came in a slow, sliding motion, as if something brushed the underside of the surface. Collins stiffened beside me. The rifle lowered toward the sound. I wished he would lift it instead of pointing it closer to the sand. "What was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, a dull thud trembled beneath us. The camels jerked. One cried out and lurched to the side. The drivers, half asleep, bolted upright with shouts that cut the night. The sand inside the ring of animals rippled. No shape emerged, but the ground rose in a subtle swell, then fell again. A sound followed, low, guttural, and too close. "Wake them," I hissed. Collins ran to shake Harrington while I grabbed Miss Price's shoulder. She woke instantly, her hand flying to her throat. Harrington snapped alert the moment Collins touched him, snatching the rifle away and scanning the darkness. "What direction?" he demanded. "There," I said, pointing at the center of the camp where the sand had shifted. But the swell had vanished. The ground lay untouched, smooth and pale. Then the nearest camel collapsed, not in the slow way of exhaustion, but in a violent jerk. Its legs folded, its body thudded to the sand as though pulled downward. The animal made one strangled choking sound, then nothing. "Move back," Harrington barked. "All of you." We scattered behind the fire as the drivers wailed in panic. The sand under the dead camel began to sink in a controlled descent. This time we saw something we had not seen before. A patch of deep crimson sliding under the surface, not attached to any limb or visible form. It moved with purpose. The sand closed over the camel as though swallowing it whole. Ashcroft stared, unmoving. His eyes were wide, spectacles sliding down his nose. His mouth opened once, closed, then opened again without sound. "What is that?" he whispered. Miss Price stepped beside me, her breath fast. "It reacts to the sound. It came when the camels panicked. One of the drivers shouted something urgent. His voice broke. The crimson patch slid again beneath the surface, moving toward the largest cluster of camels still tied together. "We need to cut them free," Miss Price said. "Now," Harrington swore. "If we go near that thing, we'll die." A sharp tremor ran under us, stronger than any before. The ground nearly knocked me off my feet. I caught myself on Collins's shoulder. "We're not safe here," I said. "If we stay still, it will come for us too." Harrington's jaw tightened. "On my count," he said, "we move as one. Cut the animals loose and drive them uphill. Anything moving on its own is less likely to be targeted." Before we could act, the sand behind us erupted. The surface burst open with a sound like splitting earth. A massive, thick body surged upward in a violent arc. It was larger than any story I had heard from the old herder. Dark red segments glistened in the firelight, each flexing with muscular force. The creature rose twice my height before curling toward the nearest camel. It had no eyes, no visible mouth at first glance, just a dreadful, tubular form. Then the front end opened. A circular maw spread wide, revealing rows of ridged inner flesh. A spray of wet, acidic fluid burst forth, hitting the camel dead on. The animal convulsed. Fur sizzled. Flesh darkened. The camel fell without a sound. A scream tore from one of the drivers. The worm's body plunged downward again, disappearing beneath the sand so fast it left a swirling funnel in its wake. "Run," Collins shouted. But the ground shook again, as if the worm changed direction beneath us. "We can't scatter," Harrington ordered. We stay tight and move uphill. Now. We rushed toward the rocky rise a few yards away, boots slipping. Miss Price kept near me, clutching her bag to her chest. The drivers pushed from behind with wild urgency. I felt the tremor shift moving beneath our path. "Faster!" Batsakan gasped. "It follows steps." Something struck the sand behind us with enough force to send grains into the air. I didn't look back. The ridge felt impossibly far. As we reached the first stones, the worm erupted again. Not at us this time, but at the tied camels we had not reached. Their bodies swung from the shock. One rope snapped. Another animal screamed. The worm spat acid again, its movement silent except for the force of its emergence. We reached the rocks breathless, terrified, and unsure whether height meant safety. The worm sank beneath the sand once more, leaving the destroyed camels half buried. The desert went still. No one spoke for a long time. Even the wind refused to move. Then Harrington whispered, "We will not survive another night on open sand." His words settled over us with the weight of truth, and we all knew the expedition had changed from exploration to survival. We stayed on the ridge until the first hint of dawn. Not one of us slept. The eastern sky slowly brightened, but the night felt as though it clung to us, unwilling to let go. Below, the dunes remained smooth and undisturbed, as if the worm had never surfaced, as if the camels had never screamed. Only the collapsed ring of supplies and the dark shapes of two half-consumed animals proved anything had happened. When the sun finally crested the horizon, its light exposed more than it comforted. The camp looked like a place abandoned in panic. Blankets, pots, saddlebags, and ropes lay scattered. The fire had died completely, leaving a blackened patch of ash and charred wood. The smell of acid lingered faintly in the warming air. We climbed down from the ridge carefully, each step deliberate. Harrington kept his rifle raised. Collins held another. He looked pale, but his hands were steady. Miss Price carried nothing except her bag, clutching it by the strap as though it were a lifeline. Ashcroft moved stiffly, his face tight with disbelief and embarrassment, as if refusing to accept that the desert had defied every note in his field journal. Batsakan and the drivers walked ahead of us, checking the sand before each footfall. Their expressions were grim. They did not look at the bodies. "We cannot stay here," Batsakan said quietly. "The creature knows this place now. It tasted blood. It will return if we disturb the sand again." "Then what do you suggest?" Harrington asked. "We need water. We need shelter. We can't keep moving indefinitely. There is higher ground to the west," the guide said. "Stone fields. Harder surface. It cannot move through that." Ashcroft shook his head. "That route takes us away from our objective. We came south for a reason. No reason is worth dying for," Batsakan said. Ashcroft's jaw tightened. "We are scientists. We are alive," Miss Price interrupted. Her voice trembled with exhaustion, but her words were firm. "That is all that matters. We cannot continue as though nothing has happened." The drivers murmured agreement. Collins nodded. Even Harrington gave a slight tilt of his head. Ashcroft seemed ready to argue, but something in the silence around him made him falter. He glanced at the sand where one of the camels lay, half sunken, half melted by acid. His eyes closed briefly. "Very well," he said. "West. We salvaged what we could. Most of the water was intact, though a few skins had burst. We gathered the remaining food, the rifles, the medical kit, the bedding, and Collins' camera equipment. What wouldn't slow us too much? Everything else we left behind." No one approached the worm's victims. Even from a distance, they looked wrong. The darkened flesh had stiffened into irregular crusts that cracked as the heat built. The sand around them held a faint, unnatural sheen. We set out again, moving with extreme care. Each step felt like a test. I watched the ground for the slightest tremor. Every shift of sand beneath my boots sent a surge of fear through me. The others felt the same. The desert had changed from an obstacle to an active threat. After an hour of slow progress, Batsakan raised a hand. "Stop. Listen." We froze. At first I heard nothing except the usual settling of sand. Then I noticed a distant, irregular movement, faint, rhythmic disturbances beneath the surface. They were far to the south, not close enough to endanger us, but unmistakable. "It moves in circles," the guide said. "It searches for what it sensed." We resumed our westward path, careful to stay on the firmer patches the guide chose. After another hour, dunes gave way to scattered flat stones, cracked and sun-baked. The shift in ground felt like stepping from thin ice to solid earth. "We're safer here," Batsakan said. No one contradicted him. We continued west until the sun stood high overhead. Heat pressed against us. Sweat dried too quickly to cool anything. My lips cracked each time I swallowed. The stones radiated warmth through the soles of my boots. At last we reached a shallow canyon that offered shade and a vantage point. The walls rose in rough, jagged layers. The space was narrow, but it felt secure in a way the dunes no longer did. We rested there, grateful for even minor relief. "We need a plan to get out of this desert alive," Harrington said once we caught our breath. "We cannot outrun that thing forever." "We do not need to outrun it," Miss Price said. "We need to understand how it behaves." Collins lowered his canteen. "Do we? I prefer to avoid it entirely." "That may not be possible," she replied. "It reacts to vibration, but not equally to all of them. It ignored the fire. It ignored the sound of voices. It followed the camels. It targeted movement first." Harrington nodded. "Agreed. It surfaces where mass and motion combine. It is attracted to large disturbances." Ashcroft rubbed his forehead. "There are creatures in the natural world that respond to vibrations. Burrowing insects, some snakes, even certain kinds of lizards." "Not 40 meters long," Collins said. Ashcroft flinched at the number. Miss Price continued. "It also retreats quickly. It strikes, feeds, and sinks. It does not linger above ground." "Which means," Harrington said, "if we stay on rock, it cannot reach us." "For now," the guide added, "rock is safe only where it is thick. Some places will break under weight. We must choose our path carefully." The canyon gave us time to think. But it also cornered us. We had shelter, but not enough water to stay long. After an hour of debate, we agreed on a new route. Travel northwest through the stone fields toward the foothills, where the desert slowly rose into harder terrain. If we reached those ridges, we might find old caravan paths or abandoned outposts. Anything that hinted at human passage. We resumed walking before the heat could lull us into stillness. None of us wanted to give the creature even a moment's chance to track vibrations through the sand beyond the rocky border. By late afternoon, the landscape changed again. The stones spread in irregular patches, leaving strips of sand between them. Each strip had to be crossed carefully. Harrington went first, testing each step. Collins followed with grim focus. Miss Price stepped lightly, her breath controlled. I forced myself to match her calm, though my heartbeat hammered. As we crossed one long strip of sand, I heard a sound that tore through my nerves, a faint shifting beneath the surface, far off but unmistakable. "Move," Harrington said, tense but controlled. We hurried to the next stretch of stone. The tremor faded. We kept going. The wide openness of the dunes was gone, replaced by scattered ridges and low cliffs. Shadows stretched long across the ground. For the first time in days, the air carried a hint of coolness as the sun dipped toward the horizon. But before dusk could settle fully, something happened that changed everything. We found tracks, human tracks. They led across a stone patch, down into a sandy depression, then disappeared among rocks farther ahead. The prints were recent. The edges had not yet softened. "Another caravan?" Collins asked, his voice hopeful. "No camels," Miss Price noted. "No cart grooves. These are only boots." My heart quickened. "Survivors? Or someone who never came back?" Harrington said bluntly. Ashcroft knelt beside the prints. They head northwest. Same direction we intend to go. Whoever made these was escaping the deeper dunes. Batsakan touched one of the tracks with 2 fingers. They were tired. "Look at the weight." They dragged 1 foot. We followed the tracks with both hope and dread. They moved erratically, as though the person staggered or changed direction often. Sometimes they veered sharply. Sometimes they stopped for several feet before resuming. Then, after almost an hour of following them, the prints ended abruptly. Not faded, not buried, ended. The last track sat on the edge of a sand patch. Beyond it, the ground was smooth. No indentations, no drag marks, no footprints. As if the person had vanished mid-step, Collins swallowed audibly. It took them. It must have taken them. "No sign of struggle," Harrington said. "No blood, no torn clothing." "It doesn't need to drag someone," Miss Price said. "It comes from below." Ashcroft's hand shook as he closed his notebook. "This is unprecedented." I felt the truth of it settle heavily inside me. If the worm could strike without warning, even on the edge of stone, then nowhere was truly safe unless the ground was solid all the way down. The sun sank lower. Night approached again. The drivers murmured that we needed shelter immediately. Even Harrington agreed. We climbed into a narrow cleft between 2 rising cliffs, where the ground was almost entirely stone. The entrance was tight enough that the worm would not be able to surge upward in a full eruption. If it tried, the restricted space might even trap or divert it. We gathered there as the last light faded, exhausted, terrified, but alive. No one wanted to close their eyes. Another night was coming. And this time, every one of us understood the real possibility that it would be our last. Night settled into the cleft slowly. The last strip of sunlight withdrew from the stone until only a muted blue remained overhead. The narrow walls trapped the cool air, and for the first time in days, the desert's heat eased from our skin. Still, none of us welcomed the comfort. Darkness placed us at a disadvantage, and every instinct said the creature hunted most easily when it sensed fear clouding judgment. We formed a tight circle on the flattest part of the stone. No one sat with their back to the entrance. Harrington positioned himself near the opening with his rifle across his knees. Collins sat beside him with a second rifle braced against the stone. Miss Price kept her bag next to her, the strap wound twice around her hand. Ashcroft leaned against the wall, his posture rigid, his spectacles slipping every so often until he pushed them up with a trembling finger. The drivers whispered prayers as they arranged themselves beside Batsakan. Their faces looked drained, their eyes hollow from the last 2 days of terror. The guide himself stared at the narrow strip of sand outside the cleft, his jaw set, his breathing steady. We tried to eat, but only a few bites passed between us. Every sound, each crack of dried bread, each swallow felt too loud. The hollow, magnified noise, sending faint echoes into the night. I found myself glancing upward often, waiting for the sky to shift, waiting for something to blot out the scattered stars. Time moved slowly. An hour might have passed, perhaps more. No one slept. We took turns listening for tremors, though all of us did it regardless of who was responsible. The desert felt unnervingly still, as though even the wind feared stirring the surface. At some point, Ashcroft began to speak in a low voice. It was not addressed to anyone in particular. Creatures respond to food sources, he murmured. They do not hunt without cause. They do not travel unnecessary distances. They do not evolve without environmental pressures. His tone hovered between reasoning and pleading, as though he could argue the worm out of existence. Miss Price answered quietly, "This is not a known creature. Whatever rules apply to ordinary desert life may not apply here." "It must have limits," Ashcroft insisted. "It must obey something." Harrington didn't look back. Everything has limits. Ours might arrive before it's due. Silence followed. I leaned my head back against the cold stone and tried to steady my breathing. My thoughts drifted to home, to quiet mornings and soft earth underfoot, and I forced them away. Thinking of England now only made the desert feel more impossible. Hours passed before the first sign came. A faint shift, sand sliding somewhere outside the cleft. Everyone froze. The sound came again. A drawn-out whisper of grains moving, barely audible but unmistakable in its rhythm. It came from the left flank of the valley, somewhere beyond our sight. I felt the vibration through the stone a moment later. A slow, probing tremor, like a hand searching in the dark. Batsakan's voice dropped to a whisper. "It tests the border." My breath tightened. "Does it know where we are?" "It knows we were near," he said. "It searches for movement." Harrington raised his rifle, aiming at the mouth of the cleft. "If it comes through that sand, we fire together." Collins nodded, though his face had paled again. The tremor passed along the outer edge of the stone. The worm was not directly beneath us. It moved parallel to the cleft, tracing a slow arc. Sand trickled into the entrance in thin streams. Miss Price spoke softly. "It cannot break through the thick stone." "No," Batsakan agreed, "but it can wait." The realization settled over us. The creature didn't need to attack immediately. It only needed to outlast our strength, our water, our resolve. We were trapped unless we risked crossing open ground again. Minutes stretched into an hour. The tremors came and went, always near, but never touching solid rock. Occasionally, the sliding sound grew louder, as though the creature surfaced briefly before sinking again. Then, for a long while, everything stopped. The desert became perfectly still. I felt sweat forming on my palms despite the cool night air. Stillness meant the creature had repositioned or changed tactics. The unknown was worse than its previous movements. A sudden impact cracked against the stone outside, sharp, loud, forceful enough to echo deep inside the cleft. The drivers cried out. Collins jerked backward, raising the rifle too fast. Harrington held up a hand for silence. Another strike landed. Stone fragments bounced into the entrance. Something large was hurling itself at the edge of the rock face. "It's testing the boundary," Miss Price whispered. "It wants to know if the stone will break." A third impact hit, harder than the rest. Dust drifted down from the cliff above. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, heart slamming against my ribs. Ashcroft covered his head with both arms. Harrington cursed under his breath. "If it weakens the stone, we'd fall into its reach." Batsakan finished. Before the next blow could come, a deep rolling vibration passed beneath the cleft. This one traveled farther and deeper than the earlier probing tremors. The ground shuddered. Small stones rattled. A faint groan rose through the rock. Then the creature shifted direction again. The tremors moved away from the cleft. Slow at first, then faster, as if it sensed something beyond us. The sliding sound of disturbed sand faded into the west. No one moved for a full minute. Finally, Harrington lowered his rifle. "It's hunting something else." "Or it assumes we've left," Miss Price said. "Either way," Harrington said, "we won't get another chance. We need to move before it circles back." Ashcroft stared at him. "Move now? In the dark?" Yes, staying here means waiting for it to learn patience. We have to put distance between us and this valley before dawn. Batsakan nodded. There is a ridge north of here, high ground, broken stone. If we reach that before sunrise, we can climb where it cannot follow. The drivers muttered nervously, but none objected. I gathered my pack with shaking hands. Collins secured the rifles. Miss Price tied the straps of her bag with steady fingers, though I saw how tense her shoulders were. We left the cleft in a single file, moving without conversation. The moonless sky made every step uncertain. Batsakan led us by instinct, feeling for the hard stone beneath the thin dusting of sand. We followed in his exact footsteps, trusting that he knew the terrain better than any of us. After 10 minutes of slow progress, the tremors returned. A faint ripple of movement crossed the sand to our right. "It knows," one of the drivers whispered. "Keep going," Harrington said. The tremor followed us, never too close, never too far. It mirrored our pace. Each time we stepped across a patch of sand, even a small one, the vibration quickened. Each time we reached stone, it slowed. The creature was herding us or tracking us with deliberate patience. We climbed a low rise of broken rock. The ridge appeared ahead, dark layers of stone stacked in jagged shelves. "Faster," Batsakan said. "It cannot reach us on the upper levels." We hurried, stumbling, scraping our palms and knees as we clambered upward. The tremors intensified. Sand below shifted in restless waves. A deep thump vibrated through the earth. Closer now. When we reached the first ledge of the ridge, the stone shook beneath us. "Don't stop," Harrington shouted. We climbed higher. The ridge narrowed, forcing us into a single line. The drivers pulled each other up. Miss Price extended her arm to help Collins find his footing. I hauled Ashcroft by his sleeve when he slipped. Harrington pushed from below, keeping everyone moving. Then a roar, not a sound, but a resonant surge of earth, burst upward behind us. The worm erupted at the base of the ridge. It rose higher than before, its dark red segments slick in the starlight. Its mouth opened wide, inner flesh contracting and pulsing rings. A jet of acidic fluid shot in a long arc, striking the lower stones. The rock hissed. Smoke lifted. The worm lunged upward. Harrington fired. The crack of the rifle echoed off the cliff. The bullet struck the worm's front segment, the only part visible above sand. A thick, dark substance oozed out. The creature recoiled, thrashing violently. "Climb!" he yelled. "Go!" We scrambled to the next ledge. Another shot rang out, then a third. Each one slowed the creature but did not stop it. The worm slammed its body against the ridge, shaking the entire formation. Stones dislodged and tumbled. Collins nearly lost his grip. Miss Price grabbed the back of his coat and anchored him. Another lunge, another impact, cracks split across the lower layers. But we were higher now, too high for the worm to strike directly. It surged again, reached the midway point of the ridge, and then slipped. Its weight dragged it down. Sand exploded outward as it fell, vanishing beneath the surface in a furious spiral. The ground trembled one final time. Then silence. We remained frozen on the ridge, chests heaving, gripping whatever handhold we found. Minutes passed. Only the wind moved. At last, Batsakan exhaled shakily. "It cannot climb higher than this. Too much stone, too steep." Harrington lowered his rifle. We survived the night. Collins leaned against the rock, eyes closed, whispering thanks under his breath. Miss Price sagged to her knees for a moment, then stood again, her resolve returning. Ashcroft stared down at the dunes below, at the place where the worm had fallen back into hiding. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "No record of this will ever prepare another man for what it truly is." "We're still alive," I said. "That's what matters." His eyes shifted to me, haunted, humbled, and changed. We climbed to the highest shelf and waited for dawn. When the first light touched the ridge, the dunes below looked empty again, serene and harmless. But every one of us understood the truth now. The Gobi held a creature that hunted without mercy, struck without warning, and obeyed no rule known to nature. We left the desert 2 days later, exhausted and fractured, but alive. Not all the drivers survived the journey back. One succumbed to wounds from a fall during the climb, but the rest of us reached safety with what little strength remained. When we finally returned to Urga, we reported what we had seen. Most refused to believe us. Some claimed dehydration caused delusions. Others insisted we exaggerated caravan dangers. Only a few listened in full silence, understanding that no man invents terror with such precision. I still feel the tremor beneath my feet sometimes, even on solid ground. I still wake in the night, expecting sand to shift beside me. But what stays with me most is the knowledge that the worm is still there, somewhere in the dunes, waiting beneath the surface. And I know that no one who sets foot in the deep Gobi truly walks alone.